Hey everyone, welcome back. Now it's been an interesting few months. Obviously I've been testing the Motion linkage forks out for a fair while now, and those videos have managed to get the attention of a few other brands. Now today I'm back on my Santa Cruz. You may notice I've now got some color-coded Santa Cruz stickers on there, which I think look pretty sweet. But more obviously the Fox 34 forks I had on, I said they weren't going to stay on there for long, and yeah, they've been replaced by some Trust linkage forks. Now, if you've been with the channel for at least a little while, you may remember my very first unboxing video I did for the Motion forks, where I mentioned, there are other brands doing linkage systems. And one of the brands I did mention was Trust. And it's really cool that my videos have got the attention of the brands. I've wanted to try these forks ever since I first saw them, and now to have them in person fitted to my bike, I just can't wait to get these things shredded. Today's video is a bit of a first look of these forks. Obviously they've been around for a little while, other people have done some reviews, but this is the first time I've ever seen them. I'm going to show you guys exactly what comes in the box, exactly how they work, at least to the best I can explain, and then a video in the future is going to be my riding impressions and seeing what I can do on these forks. Now, a disclaimer, I'm not going to claim that I am a suspension guru. I'm a trials rider. I've been used to rigid bikes for the last 20 years. It's only fairly recently that I've started to delve into the suspension world. Now, Pink Bike actually did a really cool in-depth look at these forks, and they know their stuff about suspension. They've ridden so many bikes, so many forks. They can explain how linkages, rising rates, falling rates, everything like that works way better than I can. But what I can do is I can kind of explain it in a bit more of a layman's terms. If you are like me and that you don't know suspension all that well, I can try and give a bit more of a grounded view of how they feel and how they work. And hopefully it will be useful to at least some of you. Now, because I am not a suspension guru, I've had to write down some notes. So the main features of the Trust message forks. So these are intended for trail riding, which is why they're perfect for my 5010. They're 130mm of travel, so that matches the back end pretty nicely. They are designed to fit 27.5, 27.5 plus and 29-inch wheels. They are a full carbon fiber chassis, so that's everything from the fork legs, the crown, the steer tube, and even the linkages. Everything on this is carbon fiber, except for the hardware, bolts and stuff, which are aluminium. Now, the linkage system is, what is it? It's a trailing multi-link design. So trailing, I assume that means it's behind the legs and that, it's trailing behind. So yeah, make that as you will. Doesn't mean that much to me, but we'll see if it is any good when I actually get riding this thing. Okay, got a maximum size rotor of 200mm, which is actually what I'm running on it. The minimum size you can run is 180. Now, obviously this thing runs on bearings, and you'll be pleased to know the bearings, all 18 of them, have a lifetime warranty, which is actually a pretty sweet deal. Now, the actual damper inside this thing is, it says here, twin tube through shaft design. Let's try and say that fast 5 times. So yeah, up there with very modern tech, which is awesome. Now, one really cool thing about this is because it's running on sealed bearings and the damper and everything is hidden inside the tubes, it actually has a 250-hour service interval, which is loads. Most Fox forks have about a 50-hour service interval, so yeah, that's like a vast improvement. Now, this is an air sprung fork, so with that, you pretty much get an almost infinite amount of adjustability through the air shock. Now, for external adjustments, you have a rebound adjustment and a 3-position compression adjustment. Again, try and say that fast. And that includes a fully open mode, a climb, like slightly firmer mode, and a super firm, almost locked out super climb mode. I just made up that super climb mode. I don't know actually what it's called, but super climb mode sounds pretty good. Now, these forks, despite being a full carbon fiber chassis, are a little bit on the heavy side. Unfortunately, all these bearings do add up to a slightly heavy fork at 2,000 grams. That is at the enduro side of the scale. Now, trail forks such as the Fox 34 are normally about 150 to 200 grams lighter than these. So for a trail fork, they are a little bit on the heavy side. But does the extra 200 grams matter if they ride way better? That's something I intend to find out in the future. Now, tire clearance on this thing is pretty good. For a 29-inch fork, you can fit a 2.6-inch tire in there. For a 27.5, you can fit a 2.8. The axle to crown on these forks is 535mm. So if your fork that you're currently running is, within that range, then these forks will fit your bike absolutely fine. As for price, the UK RRP on these is quite a lot. It's £1,900, which, yes, that is about £1,000 more than a very good fork from Fox or RockShox. But if the performance of these forks outclasses them, then potentially that's some pretty good value. Obviously you've seen these forks on the bike, but one thing you will see if you buy these forks is the packaging. And I don't normally make a big fuss about packaging, but as far as first impressions go, Trust have really tried to make the best they could. The box these forks come in is actually super nice. It's well thought out. The branding's obviously good. You've got Velcro keeping that down, which I don't think it really needs, but you know, if they're going to make a good impression, that's one way to do it. Once you get inside, obviously that's where you're going to find the forks themselves. And yeah, it's just generally some really nice packaging. So, well done guys. And even they've gone to the measure that the box says on here. It is being printed with earth-friendly soy ink. I think it's a nice touch that despite them using so much carbon fiber on the actual forks, at least they're trying to help a little bit with the branding. Now inside the big box, you'll find a little Trust box. Now this thing houses all the accessories and owner's manual, service kits, stuff like that. So yeah, like most forks, you'll get your owner's guide and you'll get up your setup guide as well. So I need to study this and get these forks working perfectly for me. You'll also find some air pucks. Now these are used to control your spring rate, much like you can fit in tokens to Fox and RockShox forks. These are exactly the same principle. You unscrew and have as many of those in there as you want. Now, the bad news is at the minute you can't fit these yourselves. These forks are not user serviceable. Now that is a bit of a hindrance if you are a type of person who likes to get inside their forks, tweak them, get them working perfectly for you. You're not going to be able to do it with these forks, certainly not the first generation. Trust have stated that in the future these forks will be serviceable and you will be able to fit these pucks yourself. So if that's really important to you, maybe hold off until the second generation and then you better do that. Also get a Trust top cap and bolt. Now I'm actually running a Chris King headset and it would be sacrilege to be using anything other than a Chris King top cap. So as nice as this is, Trust, I'm not going to be using it. Sorry guys. Now it's not actually just the top cap you get a fully internal headset preloader as well. Now because this is a carbon fiber stereo tube, you don't want to be hammering in a star nut. So they've supplied an expanding plug which goes inside the stereo tube and doesn't damage it, which is a real nice touch. And speaking of nice touches, Trust also supply a sticker sheet, not only with their own logo on there, but actually some protection patches as well to stop you getting like cable rub or any other damage you might get. These forks are expensive, so it's a nice touch to include these to keep them looking as nice for as long as possible. Now the next thing they include here, I've never seen in all my years of riding as an included item with either frames, forks, bikes, whatever. Now it looks like a model kit, and that's what I thought it was at first, but this is an assortment of cable guides, clips, just cable tidies, all sorts of stuff. And there's actually a little thing here. These are called jobber kits. So basically, if you want some cable management, this can do so many combinations, stuff that I've never seen before. So yeah, that's, I keep on saying nice touches, but that is a real nice touch. That is not only usable with these forks, that's usable if you've got a full bike or full bikes, because there's loads of stuff on here. So yeah, that is actually really, really cool. But that's not all, friends. Buy this today and you'll also include a torque key. Now, if you are wanting to strip this fork down, get the damper out, replace the bearings or whatever, you're gonna have to undo a lot of bolts. Now, Trust want you to tighten these bolts up to a certain Newton meter, so they have supplied this torque key, which is set to the correct torque. Use this to put your fork back together and you know everything will be at the correct tightness. Nice. Now, the last thing you'll get in the box is a shock pump. I know these forks are expensive, but I did not expect them to come with a pump, so thank you very much, Trust, for that. Right, that is enough of what comes in the box. Let's talk about the forks a little bit more. Why are these potentially better than a telescopic design? Firstly, it's worth noting that these forks have actually been in development for about 4 years. So this hasn't been rushed into. One of the guys behind these forks is the man, the myth, the legend, Dave Weigel. Now, if you're into bikes, you've probably heard of Dave, or at least his initials DW, as in the DW Link. Dave Weigel has supplied a lot of suspension designs for some of the most popular bikes out there, and he knows his stuff when it comes to linkages. The fact that he has put his name and design behind a set of linkage forks goes to show that potentially, you know, linkage forks are worth exploring. Now, I've heard on the internet from a few of the top guys in the suspension world that telescopic forks are reaching the limit of how optimized they can be. Now, telescopic forks do work extremely well. They've been around for decades, they've been optimized, and the prices are pretty good, but they do have their flaws. Now, obviously, I've been trying out another pair of linkage forks, the Motion Rides, which I actually have right here. And what I find really interesting is just how different these forks are. I just love how different brains have come up with different ways to kind of do the same thing. Now, the word kinda is important there, because as similar as these forks are in their goals, they are so different in the way they do them. Now, Motion Ride have one of their biggest selling points as the anti-dive system. Now, I know I've said that a few times, anti-dive, but essentially that means that when you are on your front brake, your forks don't compress and go through your travel. Now, brake dive is something telescopic forks suffer with quite badly. When you're coming along, put your front brake, your fork will dive into its travel, steepen your head angle, shorten your wheelbase, and you'll have a much higher chance of going over the handlebars. And this is one area where the Trust forks and the Motion forks have differed. Now, Trust do suffer with dive as well. However, they've not tried to stop the dive. They've actually used the axle path to keep the fork stable all the way through the travel. Whereas the Motion forks, they've tried to stop the dive even happening in the first place. Now, there's advantages and disadvantages to both. The Motion forks, to stop the diving, they actually make the forks slightly firmer, so when you are on your front brakes, the forks do stiffen up. Now, it doesn't stop you from using the travel, but it's as if you've dialed up the compression damping just a little bit. Now, Trust don't try and stop the dive. That allows their forks to remain fully open and fully supple throughout the travel. Now, the one thing these two forks do try to do is modify the axle path, like I just mentioned. Motion do it with a more vertical axle path. Now, the axle actually travels in the same path as a normal telescopic fork for the first half of its travel, and then goes vertical for the second half. They claim by keeping the wheelbase longer by having a vertical axle path retains your bike's wheelbase and head angle slackness. Now, that makes sense in my head. I can picture that a longer bike is more stable. That kind of makes sense to me. This is where things get a little bit complex, and is also why I had the disclaimer about me not being a suspension guru. The Trust forks do the opposite in my head to what the Motion forks do. Now, Trust have a slightly J-shaped axle path. This means the wheel will move slightly backwards before moving more vertical, much like a telescopic design. They claim that by keeping the trail longer, that is the imaginary line from your headset to the axle to the ground, and then a vertical line from above, they claim that that distance on the floor, if you make that longer, makes the bike more stable. That doesn't make sense in my head. Shortening the wheelbase surely makes a bike more unstable, and surely moving the wheel backwards makes the head angle steeper, which will make the bike more unstable. So obviously I'm not Dave Weigel, I don't know my linkage schematics, I haven't designed a suspension system in my life, so I don't know what I'm talking about, but I'm finding it really hard to get my mind just over how this linkage system works and how it supposedly keeps your bike more stable. It just doesn't make sense in my head. But it doesn't have to make sense in my head if it works out on the trail, which is potentially where I'm going to go next. These Trust forks do seem a little bit complex to set up. You've got two air springs, one in the main spring chamber, one in the damper, and then you've got your actual compression settings to dial up. And yeah, they do seem a little bit complex. So I'm not going to do a full riding video now. I'm going to actually spend some time on these forks, get them set up for me, and then let you guys know what I'm running and if I've got any tips on how to set these things up. Also, I don't have any air pucks in these at the minute. Now, Upgrade, who import these forks, are actually sending me a separate damper unit with the pucks already included, because I feel like I'll need a little bit more ramp up if I'm doing more trials and stuff, drops. I plan on riding these forks fairly hard, so I feel a little bit of ramp up will be beneficial for me. Now, you guys are obviously going to want me to compare these two forks. Now, it's not quite as easy as that. These Motion forks are very much on the enduro end of the spectrum. They are 170mm travel. They have effectively a coil, although it's not a coil spring. Yeah, they're kind of just designed for a different purpose. So these Trust forks are not replacing these. I'm still going to be running these on my enduro bike, but I'm not sure if I'm going to be able to do a completely direct head-to-head with these forks, but I will certainly try to give pros and cons for each. And speaking of pros and cons, are there any that I can initially see straight out of the box? Yeah, I think there's a couple of things. Firstly, in my last video, I mentioned the Motion forks are the most active forks I've ever felt in my life. Now, I've never wanted a lockout or climb switch on forks before, but because of how active these are, I kind of did wish for one. Now, the Trust forks do have a climb switch, so if they're anywhere near as active as these, that'll come in pretty handy. The other advantage Trust seem to have over the Motion forks is adjustability. Like I mentioned, they are a air sprung fork, so you have all the adjustability that comes with that. They also have the pucks you can add, they have compression adjustments, and they have rebound adjustments. So they've got a little bit more adjustment than the Motion, which just have a little bit of preload on the spring and kind of rebound compression adjustment, although that is the same adjustment, which Motion say they might change in the future, so that might even the scales just a little bit. Now, one advantage which potentially might go to the Trust forks is that because the linkage system is all the way down here with short arms, there's not as much leverage on them. Whereas with the Motion forks, you've got all this distance here, trying to leverage on these pivots and arms up here. They may end up developing play a lot sooner than these, although this is purely speculation. And I am going to continue running these on my enduro bike, and I will let you know if I do have any issues, but fingers crossed I won't. And kind of on the same subject, I think the extra chunky tubes and sturdy shorter arms will generally make the Trust forks a little bit stiffer than these. Now, one advantage these forks share is the lack of exposed stanchions. Telescopic forks have exposed stanchions of however millimeter travel they've got, and once you scratch those, that's an expensive replacement. Not an issue with these forks, you can scratch them up as much as you dare with carbon fiber and they will continue to work without leaking any oil or any of that bother you get with telescopic forks. Motion do claw back a mark by potentially being better air cooled. Now Trust have been pretty smart, putting all their suspension system inside the main legs. Keeps them nice and sealed, away from the muck. But you may find if you're doing repeated runs down extremely rocky tracks and it's a hot day, you're not going to get any airflow over the main suspension units, and you may find heat could be an issue more than with the motion forks. Now it's no secret that I've already fitted and slightly ridden the Trust forks. Now first impressions, I'd actually have a slightly hard time in a blindfold test to tell the difference between these and telescopic forks. They actually behave very similarly, and if you are wanting a fork that acts like a telescopic fork, they're a pretty good choice. The motion forks do behave very differently. They don't feel like any other suspension fork I've ever tried. Like I mentioned in my previous video, these actually behave much more like rear suspension, which sounds very odd, and unless you actually tried these, it's so hard to describe, but they certainly do feel different from telescopic forks. I've tried some trials action and some jibbing on the motion forks, and because of the way they work, it's actually very difficult. These forks are incredible for eating up huge impacts, going down steep chutes, but for trial stuff, nah, they're pretty crap. The Trust forks, on the other hand, first impressions are that they can actually cope with the trialsy stuff quite well. I was actually surprised by how well they coped with front wheel moves. Because of the slightly backwards axle path, they seem to soak up frontal impacts extremely well, probably better than Motions, but because the Motions have a slightly more vertical axle path, they actually cope with more vertical impacts way better. So say if you're landing drops or anything like that. Anyway, that's enough comparison. The only thing next is to get this thing set up for me and get this thing ridden, but I'm gonna save that for another video. I hope you found this first look video interesting. I know these forks have been out for a little while and there's been a few other videos on it, but hopefully I can provide some value as well. If you think I've forgotten anything or you have any questions, feel free to ask down in the comments below and I will try my best to answer those for you. Thanks for watching everyone, and keep an eye out for the next video. So have a good week. See you later everyone. Bye bye.